Hi, I'm Dr. Mandy Powell. I'm the chair of the Division of Lifestyle Health for Beth Israel Lahey Hospital.
Hello, I'm Marybeth Sherrin. I'm the author of My Hungry Head.
And today we are going to talk about the neuroscience and psychology behind emotional eating, because emotional eating is a really big challenge for so many of our patients as they're in their journeys to lose weight. And oftentimes it's the one thing that gets in the way of their ability to be successful. So a lot of patients always want to understand, why am I overeating? I know I'm not hungry and I know that I shouldn't be eating, but my brain is telling me to eat and I can't fight it. I don't know. I just have cravings. I'm hungry, but I don't understand. I just had a meal. So what we're here to talk about today is what's really going on in your brain, and why is it that your brain is telling you to eat when sometimes your stomach is telling you you're full? So some of the key takeaways that Mary Beth and I want to talk about today is, how does your brain actually form food habits and how to interrupt them? We're going to talk about the difference between what we call head hunger, emotional hunger, and stomach hunger, or what we would know as physical hunger, and then try to give you some tools about how to pause, pivot, and soothe without needing food to do those things. So to start to understand this, we sort of, from a medical side, have to understand what's going on in your brain when you get stressed, because stress and emotion are the key drivers to sometimes when we overeat. So one of the accesses in your brain, and I apologize to get very medical here, but in your brain, there's different pathways and neurotransmitters that help drive hunger. And one of the things that happens is when you get really stressed out, your body releases a neurotransmitter called cortisol. And what cortisol does is it increases your appetite as well as your desire or your motivation to eat. And what we know is that more cortisol doesn't just tell us, oh, we're hungry and go eat broccoli. It actually asks your brain and tells you that you want comfort foods, which tend to be things that are high calorie, high fat, high sugar. So, unfortunately, while cortisol is very evolutionary in that when things are stressful, we go through what we call a fight or flight response to stress, and we need food in order to provide energy and nourishment. Unfortunately, the types of food that this chemical drives us towards is fatty, sugary foods that actually really make us struggle when we're losing weight. So again, stress, triggered whether it's work stress or kid stress or home stress, leads to an elevation in cortisol, and that tends to make us want to eat. So that's one of the reasons why we tend to overeat in relation to emotions. Another pathway that's really important to understand is the reward pathway. So, a lot of times, certain foods that we like and are very palatable, the sugary, fatty foods, the carbs, they tend to activate what's called the dopamine system in the brain. And there's many different parts of the brain that it activates. But what's interesting is this dopamine reward pathway we see not only with food, but we see it with drugs and alcohol. And so the opioid dopamine reward pathway tends to make us feel really good in the moment. And so when we eat something, we feel great. And then it tends to be the cycle that we continue to look for more. And unfortunately, all the stress that we feel, we want that quick hit. We want to feel good right away. And then there's the bad cycle. The more we do it, the more we crave it, the more we do it again. And just like when people struggle with drug addiction, like opioids, the more they do it, the more they want, and the more they need to feel good. So this reward pathway is very powerful in our desire and our continued desire to eat unhealthy food. And as I said, and just as just sort of repeating it, but the opioid pathway, in addition to the dopamine pathway, triggers those systems in our brain which produce pleasure. But not only the pleasure, sometimes they also reduce pain or anxiety. So sometimes by rewarding our brain by having more opioids, they also function in the way of numbing things that we're uncomfortable with. So comfort foods can do two things. They can bring us satisfaction and pleasure while also temporarily soothing our negative emotions. So it's kind of a win-win and a quick hit for us. When we've had a bad day, we come home at the end of the night and we want something to feel better, we quickly go into a container of ice cream and we're able to feel temporarily really good and almost put away our negative emotions and suppress them. So this reward pathway helps regulate stress and emotions, but unfortunately, it's very short term. Other elements that get involved as to how we form these habits and how we manage our emotional eating is how do we regulate the impulse to do that? So we may know that this is happening and we may understand that we're stress eating, but then why can't we just say, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it tonight. I don't want to eat ice cream after dinner. Well, there's part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self regulation, and this can get weakened under stress or negative mood states. So while we cognitively know that we don't want to stress eat or we don't want to have the sweet after dinner and it's not good for us or we're trying to manage our weight, unfortunately, some of the brain pathways get weakened in the setting of these emotions. So when this braking system, so to speak, is down, the drive for reward system can dominate, making it really hard to resist temptation. So it makes it really hard, is the bottom line. And then we have to talk about what makes us feel full. Well, there's different parts of the brain, particularly what is known as the insula, which can help us interpret the internal states of hunger or fullness. So, this is the part of the brain that says, I'm full, we need to stop eating. But again, under stress or under a lot of emotions, these signals can get hijacked, and it makes it really hard to understand the true difference between hunger and emotional cravings. And Marybeth is going to talk about the head hunger versus stomach hunger or physical hunger. But when all these neurotransmitters on the brain are getting rewired under stress, sometimes it's hard for the brain to work optimally to really tell us you're hungry, you're not hungry, you're full, you're not full, stop eating. So we have to really focus on these. And then ultimately what happens over time is that when we repeatedly eat to cope with stress or sadness or other emotions, the brain learns an association. It starts to rewire itself so that it learns a negative feeling. I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm sad, I'm not feeling great. I'm going to go to food. I get temporary relief. It creates a really unfortunate habit loop that strengthens these neural connections and makes emotional eating automatic, basically. So it's almost really hard for us to take a stop at that automatic behavior because we rewired this loop to eat in relation to emotion to feel good. So in all, emotional eating is really the result of all of these stress hormones, including cortisol, the reward circuitry like dopamine and opioids, and then impaired regulation of our prefrontal cortex, which all taken together are supposed to work together, where food becomes both a chemical stress reliever and a conditioned coping tool. What's really fascinating when we look at the literature actually is that how does our brain actually get wired when we eat these palatable foods? It helps us understand the power of food and palatable foods like sugary and fattening foods. And what you can see in the images on brain MRIs is that if you look at the image where there's a lot of red color, what you can see is that in response to fattening food compared to basic food, there's so much more light signaling going on in the brain, and it's telling us, giving our brain positive signals and rewarding signals. So our brain is lighting up to these foods, whereas we're not getting that emotional response, or we're not getting the brain chemistry lighting up in response to bland foods or non-fattening foods. And there's really differences in individuals. So there's actually other studies that have looked at patients to see, does an overweight or obese person have a different response in the brain compared to a normal weight person. And what they found is that there are people whose brain lights up to ice cream in a different way than to a normal weight person. So some of the struggles, well, people feel like, well, why can't I stay away from ice cream at night? Or why am I so tempted by the chocolate chip cookie? Well, sometimes it's simply the way your brain is wired. Sometimes your brain is wired to light up like a Christmas tree to sweet foods or fattening foods, and someone else isn't getting that reward. So they don't have the same drive to eat it. So it's really fascinating to understand really how different people are and how powerful the brain rewiring can be. So just going into how the brain forms habits so that we can help you understand how to break these habits, because it's really powerful, is that there's some sort of cue that you're going to get, whether it's the warm chocolate chip cookie, the ice cream at night, a plate of chips that somebody brings out when you're watching TV. This goes to a craving. You have a response to it, and then you eat it and get the reward. So your brain starts to link foods with emotions, places, times a day. So for example, if every night someone in your household brings a bag of chips to the couch when you're all watching TV, you start to link sitting down at the couch with popcorn or chips. And then every night you go to the couch to watch TV, your brain starts to be rewired looking for the chips or the popcorn. It's incredibly challenging. And then the reward of it reinforces this cycle. It feels good. I like how I feel. The chips and the popcorn make me feel great. I'll do it again. And why do these habits stick? Well, repeated choices strengthen these neural pathways, as we talked about. And convenience and emotional comfort make habits automatic. But we have to try to interrupt these, and it's not always easy to do. But what's most important, and Marybeth is going to talk about this, is that we have to identify the cues or the triggers. So I always say to people, what are your triggers? If the trigger is the couch and the trigger is that there's popcorn sitting in the bowl, the most important thing we can do is take away the popcorn or take away the chips and don't buy them. Another way to help fix that cue or that trigger is to say, maybe I'm not going to go sit on the couch in the living room next to the kitchen. And maybe I'm going to go watch TV in the bedroom because the trigger of the food relationship to the living room couch isn't there. So there's many different ways that we can sort of try to interrupt this cycle, but learning what the triggers are and how to manage them becomes critically important. So I'm going to pass it off to Marybeth to talk about physical versus emotional hunger.
Thanks, Mandy. It's very important to take care of your physical hunger. So whatever we talk about from a behavioral standpoint is very difficult to do if your body is actually hungry. So knowing the difference is going to be your first tool in figuring out what your next step is going to be. And a lot of people, when you have a history of either binge eating or emotional eating or consistent snacking, it's hard to tell whether your body's really hungry or not. So the first step is trying to identify what real hunger is for you. Generally, it's one of these things. It could be hunger pains where you feel something in sort of the center by your breastbone, right underneath your breastbone. You could get a little bit of hunger pains, that knocking, the burning. Some people get a little bit dizzy when they're hungry, when their blood sugar is going down. They get the hangry feeling where they get a little irritable. There's the crankiness. And generally, when you're really hungry, you have that feeling of, I don't care what I eat. I'm just hungry. You're not craving any specific food. You're open to different foods because you're really hungry. Your heart could race as your blood sugar drops a little bit, but generally it's a physical sensation that you're feeling and maybe a little bit of irritability. Emotional hunger, on the other side, is a craving. It's a specific food that you want. So you could be, have 100 things offered to you, but nope, it's Chinese food that you want, or it's chocolate chip cookie that you want. It's a specific thing. And often you can't really figure out what you want to eat. People who are really hungry are open to different foods, like we said before. So if you can't figure out what you want to eat, you're generally trying to solve an emotional hunger problem. You might be fixated on one thing, or you start bargaining with yourself. I'm just going to have this one bite, or I'm just going to have one serving of this. And then that's it. So you start to get into the bargaining mode. You might have a sense of feeling out of control, like you can't stop yourself. You're not able to put on the brakes that Dr. Powell was talking about. Again, you might bargain a little more, like, listen, I'm just going to finish this one and then it's gone. But generally, the dead center piece to this is you feel guilty after you eat. Because think about it, most people do not feel guilty after they eat breakfast or lunch or dinner. It's usually around snacking that they don't have a sense of control around. So all of this points to your brain and you want to be happy. Most of our patients don't want to feel negative emotions, like who does, right? But emotions and feelings flow, right? They flow, they're not permanent. So learning to feel your wide range of emotions is going to be your second tool. So feeding yourself properly and understanding what your feelings are. But your brain wants to be happy. So let's look at how we can make that happen. Dr. Powell talked about endocannabinoids. She talked about dopamine. These are some of the heavy hitters of chemicals. There's all sorts of chemicals in your body that work within your neurological system. GABA, oxytocin, serotonin, endocannabinoids, endorphins, dopamine. We've all heard these in some way, shape, or form. But let's look at what these really mean in real life. Because not everyone can take medicine for all these, nor do we want to be taking drugs to feel happy. But there are ways to change our chemical responses in our body through things that are not drug or food related. So when we look at GABA, we think about relaxation, yoga, meditation, slow movement, Tai Chi, breath work. Think about it. When you take deep breaths, your body or your brain it thinks you're safe. When you're in fight or flight, or you have to run from something or run from danger, you can't take deep breaths. Your breaths are short, you're racing. So deeper breaths tell your body you're okay, like things are good, and you start to get more relaxation. When we think about oxytocin, there's some people who just love a hug or being with their dogs or pets or their young kids or their grandchildren. That brings joy and happiness to them. It's caloric-free happiness. When we think about serotonin, some people are driven by accomplishments, by activities that have a result. People who do puzzles, people who build wood projects or jewelry or crafts. That gives that serotonin boost that gives you a little bit of that reward feeling and generates a little more happy. Some people do gratitude journals, and that seems to work for them. Endocannabinoids. Dr. Powell suggested this one. This is your bliss hormone. This is the one that when you're walking in the woods, long runs, walks in nature, will bring about more of this chemical within your body. Endorphins, acupuncture, dance, laughter will generate endorphins. Dopamine, we talked a lot about dopamine, and it's very interesting. Those cold baths, music, like really fun music. We're going to see a trend in music. I always talk about music with our patients. Sleep, restful sleep will help to build those dopamine reserves up. So we have relaxation, cuddle puddles, accomplishment, bliss, relief, rewards. Everyone needs something different. So your third tool is to figure out what you need. Now, do you need to go to a doctor for this, a therapist for this? No, there's some pretty easy tools that you can use. And one is listing 10 activities that you love to do or would want to do that does not involve food. So some people are like, but I love to cook. I'm like, that's great. Like cooking is number 10, but try to come up with 9 other things that involve or do not involve food. And that list is your list. That list will give you insight into what your body needs. And these are the things that you might be either avoiding doing or not doing because you're so stressed or because you're just exhausted. But this is telling you, this list will be your guide. As the therapist, we could give you that list of 99 things you can do instead of eating, but none of it will matter unless it's the things that you want to do and you love to do. So I would highly recommend starting with getting your list of 10 things and push yourself to get 10. Some people can jam out 10 very quickly. Others can get to 4 and get stuck. So really push yourself to 10. Now, what do we do with this list? What do we do with the pauses? What do we do with all this? So this is what a day would look like in terms of managing emotional hunger. Your first thing you want to do is make sure that you're eating your 3-ish meals a day. So your meals are going to be with your protein, your fruits and vegetables, and a small amount of carbs every 3 to 4 hours. If you're eating every hour or so, you're grazing. And it's going to be very hard to regulate what your body needs because you're already feeding it with all of these chemicals and triggering those pathways that Dr. Powell was mentioning. So our suggestion is, again, we can't calm a hungry body down. So make sure your body's fed well, after you eat, cognitively, you're going to say, this is our magic 3 statements. That was good. I've had enough and I can have more later. You want to interrupt your habit cycle by letting your brain know you already ate and you've had enough. It might not feel like it's enough because you're not like Thanksgiving full, but you want to let your body know you've had enough and you can have more later. So there's your first step. Then your next step is going to be look at that list. Make sure you're doing something on that list to generate your body's happy. So your mindset will be finding new ways to live between meals that make sense for you and being open to discovering new ideas and possibilities and alternatives other than eating when you've already satisfied your physical hunger. And your mastery step is going to be looking at or doing what you love to do, want to do, or dream about doing. Like boredom doesn't have to win. So you can make your list of 10 things that you love to do that don't involve eating and try one of them.
So we have a few questions here. I'll just read them out. First one, how long did it take people to see real changes in their emotional eating patterns? I'm 3 months into my weight loss journey and not much is happening.
Andy, do you want me to take this one?
Sure.
I get this one a lot. And people will always ask me, how does your program work? And how soon will it work? Well, there's kind of two pieces to this, right? One is it only works if you do it. So if you practice the steps, you'll start to see behavior change. And a lot of it depends on how long you've been engaging in this behavior. So if you've been at this for 20, 30 years, and this is your eating pattern, it's going to take some time to change. Combined with the tools, some of the medications that can help calm down the food noise, generally people can see results fairly quickly, like within 3 to 6 months, but they do need to stick with it. And the most important piece is it's not a destination that you land on, like suddenly, like, wow, I'm fixed. Because the environment that we live in and the food environment that we live in is really geared to get us to want to eat. Like restaurants and food companies, they put a lot of effort and time and money into figuring out how to make the entire food experience more attractive. So this is a daily thing that we need to work on. So I would say the quick answer to that question would be the sooner you can accept that this is a daily practice, the faster you will get to that feeling and sense of control around food.
And the one thing I want to add to that as well is this is a chronic disease management issue, mental health, physical, obesity, whatever you might say. This requires, as Marybeth was saying, it doesn't go away. So even if you're in control, and we have patients that have lost weight and kept weight off for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, when put in the right environment, they can sort of relapse into old behaviors. And I always liken it to drug or alcohol addiction, that in order to avoid the triggers that we've talked about of whatever food you walk by and you see something you want to eat and it becomes hard, or that impulse control, the same thing is true just like drug or alcohol. So we never tell an alcoholic to go fill their fridge with wine or a 6-pack of beer and expect them to come home after a stressful night and not open up the fridge and want to pop a beer or have a glass of wine. Food is the same way. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we can't forego food altogether. So it's an incredibly difficult balance to be able to manage this sort of in perpetuity because we're always around food. So the mindfulness of it and having new habits form takes a long time, but we do need to continue to create environments that support our habits so that we don't fall back into old behaviors really quickly. Because most people will say, I can diet, I can do this for a few months, and then they fall off the wagon, so to speak, or they fall off track. And it takes one weekend, one vacation, one barbecue or social event on the weekend, and all of a sudden they feel like they've lost all their traction. So it takes time, and it takes a commitment, and it takes a constant forefront of your brain to truly make change over time and let it stick.
Yeah. Mandy, I'd end with we are about not staying on track, but getting back to the track as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So the quicker you get back to your track, whatever that is for you, then the more likely you're going to see lasting change.
Okay, the next question I see is, I'm worried about what happens when I eventually go off my GLP-1 medication. Does your hungry head teach strategies that would work alongside or after stopping these medications?
So, yeah, I think it's a very common concern and a very real concern as to what happens when you go off a GLP-1 medication, because these medications are extraordinarily powerful in taking away the food noise and also the cravings. So, a lot of the chemicals we talked about, the things that are driving us to food, when you take that out of the equation and that's not pervasive, you can really experience food in a very controlled way. And if you come off the medication, if you don't work on the behavior change in conjunction with being on a GLP-1, all those old habits are going to come right back the day you get off, if not within the week you come off the medication. It's extremely difficult. So it's critical that all the things we work on in My Hungry Head in terms of behavior change and habit formation, that it actually is done in conjunction with the use of a GLP-1 if you're going to get off the medication. Because without retraining your brain, the drug is working, but it's only working as long as the drug is on board. So it is powerful to change your experience of food and your habits and your environment to support your success long term.
Next, we have, I'm on Ozempic and finally not physically hungry all the time, but I still find myself reaching for food when I'm stressed. Why am I doing this?
Oh, I will take this one. That's an interesting one. And Dr. Powell had talked about in the presentation around that habit forming neurological loop that you can be stuck in. So we do have to do things differently in order to break some of those habits. So first, look at your environment. That's the very first thing we look at. Dr. Powell addressed that a little bit earlier. Like, we do need to clean up our environment, or figure out what is happening. Like, if you're great at home, but your problem is like you drive by Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks and you get one of those crazy drinks, then, maybe you find another way to go home. So we're really looking at how can we change the environment and tweak it. That's step one. And step two would be, if you're suffering from chronic stress, then what is the real problem? Like, is the real problem eating? For some people it is, but it's not a lot of people. The real problem is generally other things that are, and excuse the pun, but eating up your energy and eating up that time where you could be generating happy chemicals in your brain. That, is it a real problem? Is it not a real problem? And sometimes we need to take a deeper look at that to clean some things up. The number one thing that we see amongst most of our patients is they're helpers and they love to take care of everybody else. And it's really difficult to take that step back and take care of themselves. So there's a little bit of work to do that's very helpful around looking at what's causing the stress. I mean, stress is unavoidable, but not chronic stress. We live in a time where most of us do not have to live with chronic stress.
I think the other thing about stress in general, um, as I mentioned, food is a really quick way to numb the stress. But I think what's really important to develop over time is other outlets for the stress that are also quick. So we always tell people it could be while you're stressed at work, and instead of going to grab candy from the office kitchen, you just get up and take a walk and go get fresh air and the deep breath that Marybeth talked about. It could be at night, instead of sitting on the couch and eating when you're stressed, you go take a bath, or you read a book, or you light a candle, or you listen to music. But all of these things are really individual in nature as to which ones you find calming for the stress. Food is the quickest, easiest, cheapest outlet for most people to quickly calm their stress, but reestablishing other pathways and other habits that your new natural go-to when you're stressed are really important.
Awesome. Thank you. That was actually pretty much our last question. You just answered it. So, okay, we've had a lot of questions from the community that are similar to what you were already answering around stress and habit forming. So, all of this is super helpful. I know, I'm sure everyone can take something away from this. I know I certainly can. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up?
I think from my perspective, I would just say, you have to give yourself grace in this process. Nothing happens overnight, and we all learn behaviors over decades that get us to where we are today. So it takes time, and to have put unrealistic expectations on yourself can be overwhelming. And so I always say, take things a day at a time. You're going to learn things slowly. Nothing is perfect. And, the road to weight loss and changing emotional eating is, like we said, that you're on the road, and there are times you're going to veer off and you just want to get back on. But it's a journey, and we're not fixing people overnight. So along the journey, your weight's going to go up, it's going to go down. There's going to be highs and lows to it. And I think being patient with yourself along this process is really important.
Thank you so much for sharing all that information. And for those who are listening to this and want to connect with you further and learn more, what's the best way to connect and take away more information?
The quickest way to find us is in your patient hub with patients like me and women like me. My Hungry Head is in the patient hub, where you can have access to our stacking app, our online course materials, and our live events that we have. So just click there, and you could find us at myhungryhead.com as well. And if you are looking for a doctor or trying to navigate the medical weight loss world, you could contact Lifestyle Health.